All right, boys and girls, get your notebooks out because Daddy's going to take you to school again. I want to go over some basic progressions and certain mechanics that go along with these progressions. Um, One in particular that kind of got me a little wound up about this topic is someone who completely fucking butchered this topic in a YouTube video. I'm not going to name names because I don't care. I don't even really know who it is. But his point was to try to demonstrate that step progression. I don't know if he was trying to demonstrate a superior or not, but basically he was trying to demonstrate step progression in comparison to linear and wave progression, and completely butchered it. So I want to go through those. First of all, those three main progressions, and then I'm going to go through how I implement them into my own training. So the three main ones that I want to go over, and these can be modified into different ones, but these are the three categories of progression. We have our, let's say this is our intensity scale 0 to 100, and then this is our time scale, whatever. And we have our wave progression, which would look something like this, right? Where it's waving up and down. And then we have linear, which is like this. And then the step progression, which I'm going to write it how they wrote it, just because this is actually how it's pretty widely understood, or misunderstood rather, but basically like this, and just continually, so basically 2 weeks in a row at the same effort, and then upping it. Okay, so and yes, that might be a little bit more sustainable than the straight week to week linear progression. But linear progression doesn't necessarily imply added weight to the bar each week. It implies attempting to get the same amount of progress with the same amount of effort and intensity week after week after week. Okay, so when we change it up that way, linear becomes a little bit different, and now all of a sudden this is linear. That progression is still linear. If it does not have down steps, then it is linear. This, if these are not down enough in intensity and volume, then this is still linear. Okay? So these have to be intentional. Now, let me show you what step progression is actually supposed to look like. Fucking shit here. Right. Look. Got a scale. Okay? Proper step progression is going to look something more like this. It's going to be, I'm just going to start out here so it's easier to see. We are 2 weeks in a row, and then a down week. And then 2 weeks in a row, slightly higher, you can't see, but that's, let's equate that to 2.5 to 5% more than this period, right? So this is up just a little bit from this period after the down portion. Then we do another down portion. That down portion is again just like slightly above this one, like 1%, and again this is effort, volume, weight on the bar, not just weight on the bar, right? So we can bring that down in weight lower than this one, but still stimulate the effects of a proper down week doing other things, whether it's higher reps or simply just taking more time off. Sometimes that's needed, but regardless, we want kind of across the board after a few of these line up, and then years go on, training blocks go on, whatever. After all this compiles up, we eventually want these to be going up from one another, as well as these to be going up from one another. Okay, so that's true step progression and or step down progression. And the big misunderstanding in strength sports, it seems, is that down weeks are not quite as important as in other sports. But let's talk about why we need the down weeks. The big obvious reason is rest, right? But that's not the most important thing. I think most people are tough enough that they can push through an 8 to 12 week training block without taking a down week. But down weeks are more so for the purpose of revisiting the mechanics that you just pounded away at with progressively heavier weights. In doing so, you might be developing some bad habits, whether it's physical or mental. But regardless, you're handling loads that are above your capacity to make corrections and learn under. So those down weeks are for revisiting the mechanics to ensure that better and better habits are built each time heavy weights are hit. Okay? So whether you're doing this style or wave or whatever it is, the down weeks are for mechanical revisiting and neurological reinforcement, not just rest. Okay? If it was just about rest, yeah, fucking pound it into the wall. Keep fucking going until you break. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. Now, I'm going to talk about how I like to use step progression and wave progression. We can pretty much throw linear out the window. We know that's for fucking Neanderthals from Iowa and shit like that. So I'm going to just talk about how I use these different progressions. The wave progression one, let's talk about energy systems, not just a certain lift, upper body or lower body. So you can assume in my system, just like any other well thought out system, you've got a strength stimulus for your maximal strength, the most amount that you can tolerate for upper body and lower body. I'm going to simplify that into one line, and for myself, I use wave progression. So right around here is going to be our 65-70% mark. That's kind of the window where these numbers are going to start, right? So we want to pick variations that are strong enough for us mechanically and relate to our sport enough that there's direct carryover and very minimal breakdown under the maximal amount of load that you can handle. So this is where that wave progression kind of starts happening on my main strength lifts, okay? Now, personally, I'm training strongman, so my dynamic work alternates between the deadlifting and squatting and pressing, like kind of how maybe conjugate, West Side style conjugate might have it set up, where it's dynamic speed work with a barbell lift, or something static where it's just having the purpose of maximal force production and acceleration. And that would be my off-season time. In my off-season time, while those things are the focus, I am down here in my correctional type stuff. We'll just put a block down here because there's not much of a progression on the correctional prehab rehab stuff, the mechanical stuff you're trying to learn. There is a progression, but oh my god, I put my shirt on backwards. I'm just gonna take it off. It's not necessarily worth mapping out as strategically as this on our correctional and learning stuff down here. This is just kind of generally upping the frequency and the load under very strict certain parameters and very light. So then in the middle we have like our hypertrophy, our contractile capacity, and our dynamic work, which are going to drive up those main lifts, right? So going back to strongman, you've got to be strong in the static sense, and you also have to be strong moving weight. So this is how I balance that. I use the step progression for both the moving events and my barbell dynamic work, and they both just kind of go hand in hand. So I'm going to draw it out, and then I'm going to talk about off season and then in season. So, it's going to go like this. Right. Okay. So in the off season, down here I'm working on sprinting mechanics. I'm working on very basic stepping, skipping, forward movement mechanics at the most basic level. Here is where I'm doing my barbell dynamic work with accommodated resistance. Okay? And I've set it up this way because actually, I don't want to call this accommodated resistance in a way, but since explosive kind of like very fast moving type things is something I'm very strong at. I'm not as good up here on the maximal strength, but I'm very good down here on the dynamic strength and the work capacity. So I don't find it necessary for myself or really many other strongmen who need to be good at deadlifting heavy for a long period of time and just like quick from situation to situation. I don't find it useful to do true dynamic consistently all the way through. Now here's how I do it. This will be a true dynamic, right? This will be something like 8 to 10 hard singles or doubles or triples, true regular old dynamic setup work. Then we'll come up here and work up, sets of 3 to 5 in the, like 70 to 75% range. Then here we'll do triples or doubles, 75 to 80% range. And then we'll come back down and we'll do a long set of 10 to 20, an AMRAP or something like that at a very similar weight, if not the same weight as the initial speed work. So you can see how this kind of encompasses and visits every required deadlifting skill of a strongman for the off season. Okay? Now, what I was trying to say about how I'm not really going to call it accommodated resistance, but you're tapping into those weights on those 2 up weeks that are a little bit heavier than true dynamic weights, which a true dynamic weight is something that you can maintain or accelerate all the way through. Past a certain point, it's either going to stay the same or slow, and that's the barrier where it goes out of dynamic effort. And that's why we use the accommodated resistance, because we want to be able to accelerate through a certain top weight, because we might not be able to have that same acceleration off the floor if all of the weight at the top was started from the floor. So that's one reason why we use the accommodated resistance in dynamic work. So in this sense, if we're still pulling with the intention of being dynamic in these 2 up weeks, we're still somewhat challenging that stimulus in a certain way where we're trying to chip away at that top end of the dynamic work. Because when we get down here and we're using these weights, eventually, look, these weights, these true dynamic weights are eventually going to be the weights that you started at. So that's kind of the process on the in-season dynamic work with me. This makes it a lot simpler for accommodated resistance setup, because that's just a whole other thing that I can get into another time. But this just completely simplifies it, in my opinion, and makes it so that you can gain, a good amount of dynamic stimulus without having to consistently fuck around and wonder what you're doing on the bands and chains and shit like that. So let's talk about in season now. In season, we're gonna circulate the sprint mechanics and everything with the endurance mechanics and the work capacity mechanics that we got from the barbell dynamic work, with the sprint mechanics that we got from the prehab, rehab, all that learning bullshit work, and we're gonna combine them. We're gonna run that same progression here, right? But now our dynamic work is whatever moving event, yoke, farmers, right? Down here, I'm revisiting my sprint mechanics, my stability mechanics. I'm doing, moving events that are at such a light weight that I can push for 100 to 200 feet, and in that time, think and make corrections and improve the quality and control during the run. Whatever it may be, those are my mechanical revisiting down weeks for the moving events. Now, if you set this up right, the dynamic work from the off-season deadlifts should just kind of funnel in and transition nicely into your maximal lower body work for the last, 4 to 8 weeks before prep, so you don't really have to spend too much time throughout the year deadlifting super heavy and spending your back. You can spend most time squatting or doing a deadlift variation like sumo or something that's very comfortable and safe for your body to push week after week. But you'll gradually, as you progress through here and get closer to contest, you'll change the dynamic deadlifting variation into your competition style deadlift, closer and closer to that as that comes up to the main work. And then the moving mechanics down here are getting funneled up into whatever event that you have for the contest, which is nice because, as long as you're continuing to do these mechanics down here, they will generally carry over into any moving event that you have to do. You just kind of pick the one that you want to do and start circulating everything up through, intensity and variation. So this is just kind of a good way, or I don't even know if it's a good way necessarily. It's my way of incorporating dynamic work, skill practice, maximal strength work, and kind of adjusting and periodizing it through the year based on the athlete's needs, specifically with strongman. Now, this system can be adjusted to any sport. I have professional fighters, bodybuilders, powerlifters, football players, general people who don't want to compete. This system works very well because you replace this with the specific mechanics that you need to learn for your desired sport or goal. You replace this with, again, just acceleration and force production mechanics where you're trying to drive up your maximal speed, and then this obviously is your maximal strength, and then the amount of times that you're doing that is all dependent on the athlete and their certain point of the year in comparison to their most important contest. So this is just kind of a rough breakdown of all that shit. So hopefully that was helpful. Don't know what's going on with my computer. I think that's a fly. Get the fuck off my computer. Hey! This is a no-fly zone. All right, that's it.